Hello, and welcome to this webinar on Enterprise Integration Framework. My name is Marc Young, and my colleague Ilan Madjar will be going over how the new Enterprise Integration Framework, or EIF for short, is used in conjunction of 3D Experience to integrate 3D Experience with other enterprise systems like ERP. Let's do a quick overview of XLM Solutions. Ilan, yep. So for those of you who do not know us, we at XLM Solutions provide PLM services and solutions. We work on all 3D Experience and Dassault PLM products. Obviously, 3D Experience, both cloud and on-premise, SolidWorks PDM, and Novia Smart Team, and some of the other brands within the Dassault portfolio. We've been around since 2005, so we bring many years of experience within the PLM industry. We are a partner of SolidWorks, Dassault's sister company, obviously a partner of Dassault itself, and partners with other PLM companies as well, such as Aris, OpenBOM, Autodesk, etc. We really prize ourselves for being highly respected in the PLM industry, both for our business expertise and our business savvy. We're always on the forefront of learning new technologies, best practices in the industry, trends, etc. And we provide, all aspects of PDM or PLM implementations, everything from, assessments and discovery workshops to general implementations, customizations, integrations, which we'll be mainly talking about today, data migrations, and then training and support. Let's move to the next slide. So why EIF? So why would a customer need the EIF tools within 3D Experience? And really, there's many reasons for that, but the main reason is to integrate 3D Experience with other systems and support both large exports and imports or data migrations. So the EIF, or the integration framework, is really a set of roles. I'll get into that in a later slide, but that lets you integrate with, other systems, mainly ERP systems. For example, you can send item masters, which are physical products, from 3D Experience to ERP. You can send BOM data, obviously the bill of material, the reference children and quantities to 3D Experience. And you can send files, whether it be viewables or derived output files like PDFs and step files, or other files to ERP. In many cases, a lot of times this data is sent on a promote to release event in 3D Experience. You can also use it to update data in 3D Experience based on other systems. Perhaps, engineers that are using 3D Experience need to see costing information or approved supplier information or inventory quantities, and that data can be read from that external system and then updated within 3D Experience, for example, attributes on a physical product. Part numbering. If your part numbering is not coming from 3D Experience, but from an external system, the Enterprise Integration Framework can pull that next part number from the external system and use it as the part number, the title, the enterprise identification number, or the EIN number on the physical product. As for importing data, there's tools within the framework that allows you to do imports of data, i.e. large data migrations or single bill of material imports. This will allow you to import, data from a legacy system to a to 3D Experience. Also, if those of you that are familiar with the Transition Assistant, which is a product from Dassault that helps you migrate data to 3D Experience, the EIF technology is the basis for using that Transition Assistant tool. The underlying technology is all based on that EIF import technology. Exports, if you want to export data, i.e. a full CAD structure and all of its derived output from 3D Experience outside of 3D Experience, you can do that using the export mechanisms. And then finally, you can use this to trigger events. Um, Within, for example, Cloud, 3D Experience Cloud, there's not a lot of ability to add custom triggers within the system, but through the EIF technology, you can add those custom triggers. And for example, upon creation of a physical product, you want to auto assign it to a classification structure. That trigger can be handled by the EIF technology. So let's go to the new slide. Um, so what is EIF? And before we get into that, just want to mention real quickly, EIF, or the technology or the roles that you see here, can work, on premise or on cloud. Many of the EIF technology is developed for the cloud first, but can also work on premise. For doing things on premise, there's a lot of different ways to handle different operations, with EIF being one of them. But for cloud, EIF is kind of the main solution to handle a lot of different operations, such as integrations and triggers, etc. In any case, EIF is comprised of three roles. There's the PFI role, which handles agent management and event publishing. We'll talk about those in more detail. And then you have the XXH role and the XXC role. And though the XXH role is a single license role, where XXC are tokens, but basically every time you do a import or an export job, you make use of the XXH role, and exports take a certain amount of tokens, i.e., certain token per part used in an assembly structure when doing the export. So if you are going to be doing exports, that's where the tokens come into play. And if you need more detail on how many tokens per part per export, we can get into that in more detail after the fact. In the addition to the three roles I described, EIF makes use of a messaging queue. By default, it's using ActiveMQ. This is all handled for you on cloud. There's a little bit of setup needed on premise, but it is using this messaging queue to handle different messages that 3D Experience will send, i.e. on promote, it will send a message to the queue, and then you do something per that message. So let's move to the next slide. This slide kind of gives an overview of how the EIF architecture works in general. The slide says on cloud here, but it really pertains to both on cloud and on premise. But basically on the left, you have 3D Experience, whether on cloud or on premise. And when something happens, i.e. event, it gets written to that middle layer, which is either a iPaaS, platform as a service that you purchase by a third party, or your own custom, let's say, middle layer or handling of the request. And then that middle layer does something, i.e. send the data to the ERP system or a different PLM system or any other system you have in-house. Vice versa, the solution can pull data from the external system on the right and then pass it back to 3D Experience on the left. And there are commercial middleware, iPaaS technologies like Boomi, Jitterbug, Workatao, which you have to pay for, and then they might have built-in connectors to various systems. But I would say nothing is completely plug and play. There's still configuration and customization that needs to be done. You can create your own middleware level, and you can do that in a hosted or non-hosted environment, and you can develop it in various languages out there. And then finally, we at XLM Solutions have already started developing various solutions to connect 3D Experience with other systems or provide other functions. So we will demo later a simple 3D Experience to SharePoint integration. We can use this to watermark data, i.e. watermark derived output files that get generated in the platform, or integrate to other ERP systems out there as well. So let's go to the next slide. Part of PFI role is agent management. So every time you're going to connect to 3D Experience to do an operation, i.e. pull data or push data, you need to authenticate it as a user. So this is the ability to set up a user that will do that authentication behind the scenes. Quick note, a admin needs to run the role or the widget to set up the agent, but the agent cannot be an admin user. And that agent needs to have other roles assigned to it per the operations the agent will do. So for example, if that agent needs to grab a bill of material information out of 3D Experience, the agent would need to be assigned the engineering release or Zen role to call the necessary APIs to get that bill of material information. Next slide, please. For on-premise customers, the authentication is a little bit different. You're not going to be using the PFI agent to authenticate, but you'll be using other technology, specifically a batch service authentication, which allows you to create a different type of service to authenticate back to the platform. And again, if you want more details on this, we can discuss it after the fact. Next slide. Also, as the PFI, it controls what events you can publish or listen to. And as you see here, you can list, on the left going down all different types that exist in 3D Experience, and then on the right, the different operations that you can do for those types. So for example, if you want to send data to ERP upon release, you could, enable the promote event for physical products. And what would happen is whenever a physical product is promoted from one state to the other, i.e. to the release state, it would listen for that and then grab the information being promoted and transfer it to ERP. Next slide. We also have the XXH role. Like I said, when we do imports and exports, they create these jobs, these import and exports jobs. And from the XXH role, you can monitor the jobs, see the jobs, whether they're running, completed, failed, etc., and see the status of the jobs. I believe also you can get a look at how many tokens are used and what tokens you have left. But basically, this is where you can view the status of the import and export jobs. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to now hand it over to my colleague Ilan to give more of a technical review, a deep dive of how to set everything up to work. Here you go, Ilan.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So, hi everyone, turn on my camera. So up until now, Mark covered really the why, the reasons for using the EIF, the roles, the business cases. I'm going to talk about more the how to set up and configure the EIF, whether you develop your own middleware, your own quote unquote iPaaS, or whether you configure a commercial iPaaS. This is going to be a technical topic, and there's some prerequisite technical skills. It's not rocket science, but it's definitely going to be some technical slides. I'm going to turn off my camera so you can focus on the slides as I go through the various topics. Okay. So the topics I'm going to go over today are a little bit about the technology behind the scene on the server side. So Mark mentioned the ActiveMQ and JMS, the queuing mechanism and the messaging system behind the framework. We'll talk about some of the server components, what's managed on the platform as part of the framework. Often I'm being asked, where can I start? Where's the material? If I want to start working with the EIF, where can I find the documentation? So we'll talk about that. I'll guide you and I'll point you to where you can find the documentation. We'll talk about the supported formats, whether you're looking to export data to external systems such as ERP or various other enterprise systems, or if you're looking to migrate data, whether it's files or metadata, into the platform. So what are the file formats that are supported in and out of the system? We'll talk about the process itself, the steps and the APIs the EIF APIs for exporting data out of the platform or importing data into the platform. And then we'll go through a demo and we'll conclude. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the technology behind the framework. And again, I encourage you to read more about this technology. There's plenty of material about this on Google. This is not so specific by any means. This is primarily, Apache open source technology that Dassault has been using. So the JMS, or Java Messaging Services, Java Messaging API, it's basically a Java specification that allows two programs or two components to communicate amongst themselves in an asynchronic, reliable way using a standardized messaging system, Java-based messaging system. The Apache ActiveMQ, which is the default queuing, the default queuing messaging system, or the different queuing mechanism that is used on the platform on the cloud, is okay. Apache ActiveMQ is the message broker. It's the mechanism to essentially broker the messages, the JMS messages. It is the default mechanism used by the platform on the cloud. If you're using the on-premise, the platform on-premise, you have other options. Again, the default assumption or the default setup by the platform is that you're using ActiveMQ, but if you're on-premise, you can essentially use any broker or any messaging broker. It could be Apache Kafka, anything that supports JMS, but it requires some additional configuration, and I'll show you that through some of the in the next few slides. I'll point you to the documentation. It's a simple process. Okay, so let's talk about the two different types of queuing and queuing models that are supported in the system, and this is really derived from the ActiveMQ queuing models. This is not unique to the 3DEXPERIENCE. The one on the left is called publish and subscribe, or broadcasting model. The one on the right is called a load balancing model, and was only recently, in late 2024, was added or started being supported in 3DEXPERIENCE. The model on the right is used mainly for load balancing. So if you have a scalability to support high volume of users. For example, if you want to listen to a release event every time you release an object or a physical product or a drawing, and you want to push this to an ERP system, for example, and there's a need to send those messages to SAP system basically in a high scalability mode, the right model will simulate a load balancing mode, where you could have multiple listener, multiple middleware running, in which case no one consumer program would have the same message processed at the same time. So it simulates a load balancer model. You could have more than one middleware, more than one iPass running and processing various messages just to basically simulate a load balance mechanism where you increase the throughput. The producer in this case would be your 3DEXPERIENCE in this case. So the model on the right simulates a load balancing model. The model on the left, where the queue is called a topic, is more of a broadcast or publish and subscribes. In this model, if you have more than one middleware, both middleware or both listener will actually subscribe to all the messages. This model is better for a business case where each listener performs a different business operation. For example, the consumer one or listener one sends the information to the ERP system, consumer two sends the information to a supplier system, and so on. And so in the left model, all the messages are sent to all the listener programs. Okay. Now, in most cases, if you're in a small implementation, There's no need for scalability. You'll probably have a single listener program, and that will basically perform all the business operation, and it's not an issue. But if you're talking about high scalability, where there's a need for, again, higher performance, you may want to consider one of the two models. And again, 3D Experience supports both model, the topic or the virtual queue. One more important point to mention is that both the topic and the queue are durable, which means that if for some reason there's a disconnect from the server, the messages are maintained or will be served in the queue for up to 12 hours. They're not lost for up to 12 hours. Okay, so let's talk about some of the server components. And this is really something that is, from a client standpoint or from a middleware, is not really something you need to worry about when you develop your middleware or when you configure your commercial iPaaS. But it's important to know that there's a comprehensive, robust mechanism that runs as part of the framework on the server side. So there's a bunch of services that runs on the server side to essentially manage the framework. There's event producer, so every time you create an object, a physical product, a drawing, a document, a CA, it doesn't matter. But every time you create an object that you want to listen to on the server, you have 3D space that runs and creates those objects. You have the enterprise IP exchange server or services. Those are the services that are responsible for actually exporting or importing and packaging the data that needs to be exported. So that's another set of resources and services on the server. There's a whole event publishing services. So listening and publishing, that's another set of services. There's a whole queuing, the orchestrating the messaging back and forth, and then the credential and security. Various services all work in conjunction, and that entire thing is working for you on the platform, managing for you, seamless to the listener, but all that is being done for you and managed for you on the server. And this is kind of a diagram that depicts the server versus client components. So everything, all those services that I just mentioned are on the left in dark blue. So if you're on the cloud, it's all managed for you. Those are all those services running and managed on you on the platform. Whereas the gray is your listener or your commercial iPaaS that is essentially communicating in the middleware versus the server side on the left. Whereas if you're on an on-prem environment, it's somewhat similar, but there's some configuration and installation that you have to do, meaning it's still all served and managed for you on the server, but you have to go to do some installation. So first, you have to install your message broker, whether it's ActiveMQ or Apache Kafka or whatever JMS-supported message broker that you'll be using. You have to install that. You also have to install the 3D Experience respective media to communicate with that active broker. And then you have to go through some configuration, which is what I'm referencing here on the right, to kind of connect 3D Experience to the message broker, which is not an overly complicated process. It's just some technical steps that you have to go through. But once you go through those steps, that communication at that point becomes as if it was on the cloud. So at that point, everything is done on the server. And then again, everything on the right side is your listener or your iPaaS at that point. So again, if you're on-prem, you have to install a 3D Experience media. You have to install the broker, ActiveMQ or Kafka, whatever you choose. Go through some configuration and then still develop your own listener. Okay, so we talked about the server components and a little bit about the technology behind the queuing mechanism, the JMS. Let's talk about the documentation next. So if I want to start developing and learning about the framework, I'm often being asked, where can I start? Where do I find the documentation? So this is, again, a very technical topic. And most of the documentation is under the developer user guide. So to access it, you have to log into the SO website, go to the support menu, under the documentation, pick the developer guide. It doesn't matter whether you pick the cloud or on-prem. It's the same thing. I'm showing here the cloud, but you can select the on-prem option and then expand the web services and events and expand the enterprise IP exchange resource. This is where you'll find everything I'm going to show you in the next few slides regarding the export and import APIs. Okay, anything specific to the EIF API documentation is available under the Enterprise IP Exchange resource. Okay, another library that is relevant, again, under the web services and events, there's another library, sibling library called 3DSpace, has some additional information relevant to the EIF. In this case, the information is relevant to the type that you're listening to. So for example, in this example, if I want to listen to an event that is relevant for a physical product or a drawing or a document, it doesn't matter. In this case, for example, I'm listening to an event of a creation of a physical product, and I want to see the message itself. What's the message that is relevant to the creation of a physical product? I have to go to the relevant respective resource, in this case, engineering, which represents the physical product, and under which I'll find the information about the engineering event, meaning about the physical product, and I'll see the specific message that is related to the creation of the physical product. And this is what my code or what my listener will get in case the physical product is created in the system. Okay, so again, depends on what I'm listening to. In this case, it's engineering resource, meaning physical products. If I wanted to listen to document, to non-CAD document, I would go under the document and I would see about engineering or about document events, and I will see the metric information that the listener, the EIF framework will provide based on the event that I'm listening to. Okay, so again, those two libraries, the 3DSpace and the IP Exchange libraries, are where most of the material related to the EIF, to the framework, resides in. This is again going back to what Marc showed earlier, the PFI, and where you can essentially register to specific events. So create is a create event, status change is a promote event, version is a revise event, and depends on the type. Engineering item is a physical product, and so on. And these are examples for those three specific events: create, promote, and revise. An example of the message, human readable example for the messages that will be processed by or sent to the listener based on the specific event. Okay. Okay, so let's move on. And now that we've talked about the documentation, let's talk about the supported type or the file types that can be either extracted, exported, or imported into or out of the 3D experience using the framework. So as far as the exports go, the native CAD file that can be extracted. So the list at the top here, and we're dealing about the Power BI CAD types. You can see the list at the top. So as far as these CAD types, you can extract parts and drawings. Obviously, AutoCAD and DraftSight, these are only 2D. For these CAD types, you can extract the parts and the drawings. The APIs of the frameworks do not support extracting assemblies as of today, although you can extract assemblies using other REST APIs of 3DEXPERIENCE. So you can build a complete solution. It's just that the out-of-the-box framework APIs cannot extract the assemblies. You have to use other sets of APIs and roles in the system, but it can be done. As far as derived output extractions, if it's needed, the framework API support the derived output extraction. But as you know, or some of you may or may not know, derived output assemblies are not extractions. Derived output extraction is not supported because there are no derived outputs for assemblies as of today in 3DEXPERIENCE. But otherwise, parts and drawings are supported. The metadata is always extracted in a StepX file, along with the other files. And then there's some other reports in the zip formats that are exported as well. As far as the imports and file formats, so for These are the file formats that the CAD file formats or non-CAD and non-CAD that can be imported. So CATIA V5, SolidWorks, and AutoCAD. So obviously V5 and SolidWorks is 3D and 2D, assembly parts and drawing. AutoCAD is 2D only, and documents are non-CAD, your PDFs, Office, and whatnot. And again, the metadata, so if you need your attributes, your history, has to be sucked in as a step XML 242, step X file in order for the 3D experience to actually understand the data and map it correctly. Okay, now that we know the technology, the documentation, and the files that can be extracted, the file format can be extracted and exported, let's talk about the process. Okay, I'm mainly going to focus about the export today, but the import process is very similar, even the APIs. It's just it's a reverse process. Okay, so focusing on the export process, the first thing you have to do, and I'm going to walk you through each, step by step. First thing is to listen to the messages that are coming from the platform. So for example, if I'm subscribed to a release event or a create event or a promote event, it doesn't matter. So there's first thing is to listen to that event. There's an API to listen to the event. Optionally, the SO recommends to run a login check, which is not mandatory, but it's a good practice when dealing with REST APIs, generally speaking, but it's not mandatory. It's documented, but not mandatory. The next step is to call a create export API, which will not actually start the export. It will simply register with 3DEXPERIENCE, kind of like create a ticket of what needs to be exported. So this is the step where I'm telling the system, I need to extract the native CAD, yes or no. I need the derived output, yes or no. The metadata, other geometrical information, things like that. So basically, I'm telling the system the definition of what I'd like to extract, but I'm not actually starting the extract yet. That's the create export. Once I get an acknowledgement and an export ID, I then call the submit export using an export ID, which will then actually start the export, meaning you'll start a job on the server that will actually package everything I told the system I need to extract. Once that job, that package is computed and ready for me, I will get a message. And then I'm going to call another API that will basically get me all the export extracted data, all the results, the files, the logs, and everything. So I can then get the data and send it out to the external system. And obviously, there's some retries if there's errors and whatnot. Okay, so this is the process and the APIs, and I'm going to walk you through each one of them in the next few slides. This swim lane diagram kind of depicts it for anyone who's not super technical, but kind of follows the same process with a little bit more details. So as a user, I start here at the top left side of the diagram. I save, let's say, a physical product. So here I'm trying to mimic a process where I'm exporting a flow, I'm listening to an event of a creation of a physical product, but this could have been a creation of a drawing, completion of a CA, creation of a manufacturing item. It doesn't matter. Okay. So in this case, a user saves a physical product. That's the user doing an operation. Then in 3DEXPERIENCE, which is the second lane, the physical product is created in 3D space and a publish event happen. And a JMS message, if you remember from that first slide about the JMS, and the JMS message is going into that topic. Remember the Q types? It goes into the topic. And my listener, which is the lower lane in the swim lane, is listening and catching this message and reading it and checking, is this my event? Is this a create event of a physical product? Yes, that's the correct condition. Okay, now let's define what do I need to do for this physical product. I want to extract the native file, yes or no. Do I need the derived output, yes or no, metadata, etc., etc. Yes, send this request to register this request with the 3D space. So I call it create export API, which again only registered kind of like a ticket with the system. Okay, and as a result, I'm going to get a created confirmation from the system along with a export ID number from the system. It's not actually creating the export, it's just registered with the 3DEXPERIENCE. Once I get this registered, this 201 created, I'm actually going to call the submit API, which essentially going to tell the system, actually now go ahead and start the job server. Start the creation of the package, which again goes back to the 3D space server. which starts this creation of the package, everything I defined, the native file, the derived output, whatever I told it to create. By itself, it's a job server. It's going to happen on the server. And when this package is computed, I'll get another message, which my program is listening, my listener is listening to, another JMS message that tells me, okay, it's now done and computed. It's ready to be downloaded and sent out to the system. So I'm going to listen to this and check that everything is computed correctly and no errors and whatnot. And I'm going to call another API to get me all the results, give me the files and everything I need to get based on from that package. I'm going to get this information and then send it out to the external system, whether it's an ERP, some centralized SharePoint system, supplier system, etc. So that's kind of the business process and the steps that you have to implement, whether you're doing your own middleware or using a commercial iPaaS with, doing it through some low code. One way or another, you'll have to go through those steps, calling those APIs. Okay. So now that you understand the process, let's dig in a little bit. I'm not going to go into details, but let's dig into each steps in a little bit more details and then go through those APIs. Some of the examples that you're going to see here are VB, C#, and the reason is that it was presented recently in 3D Experience World, and so the SolidWorks channel is still using .NET. If you need Java examples, please reach out to me. We can help you with Java as well. But the first step, like I said, is listening to the messaging that are coming from the platform. So for example, in this case, again, if we're listening to a create event, we will call listen. This is going to be a listening code for whatever the event is, right? And there's really two listening events that we're listening to. One is the user event, release event, create event, whatever we need to listen to. And the other one was later on in the process. Remember that package. When is the package ready? If I want to export something, when is that package computed and ready to be downloaded? So I'm really listening to two events in my code. One is more like a user event. The other one is an admin, or that package, when is it ready? So I call it an admin event, right? So again, anyone that knows VB can see that I have like two listeners here. Again, Java would have the equivalent code as well. And I'm showing you the code. Again, it's not training, so I'm not going into details, but you have the equivalent code that, how do I listen to the events using the framework terminology and 3D experience, okay? And this is the example, again, example of that specific message. If I have a VPM reference or a physical product, how do I verify, get the ID of that physical product so I can then go and ask to export it and whatnot? Again, not going into details, this is just an example. Okay. Next step, which I didn't talk about during the steps in the swim lane, is authentication. Marc mentioned it a little bit earlier. But normally, for those of you who use 3D Experience as users or use maybe the 3D Experience REST APIs, typically you authenticate using the passport, right? As kind of the internal SSO using the CAS system, right? The CAS protocol. When you use when you have the roles, the licenses for the framework, for the EIF, for the EIF framework, you have a different way to authenticate to the system, which is a little bit easier, also save you a little bit of coding. You can use one of two ways. You can use the basic authentication. I'm showing this here either in Postman, for those of you who are a little bit coming from the developer background, or in VB. But you can either use the base64 old HTTP basic authentication, or I'm not showing it here, but there's another, as of 2025, there's support for OAuth authentication as well. So it saves you don't have to go through Passport like you normally do in REST APIs or like you do as a user. But again, only if you have the framework licenses. It's a little bit of a shortcut, easier way to authenticate if you're on cloud. This is only for on cloud users. So every API that you're using with the framework, if you have the framework licenses, there's an easier way to authenticate. So it's a shorter way, whether you're using the basic HTTP authentication or OAuth, even though I'm not showing the example for OAuth in this case, okay? If you're on-prem, there's another way. Again, it's all documented. I'm not going to go into details here to use will use the CAS authentication. It's documented under the 3D Passport documentation under the developer guide. There's a way to use the transient token, so we can still associate the user to a kind of a batch service user and pass along the secret in the header, like I'm showing here. in Postman. Again, you can. This is very well documented under the 3D Passport documentation and developer guide. You can use a similar concept logically, but again, different implementation when you're using on-prem, but this goes through the passport as a transient token, okay, as a batch service. So again, different ways to authenticate whether on-prem or on cloud. Okay, so again, we listen to the message, we have the message. Another way, again, if you're on cloud, the SOA recommends to check a login. It's not mandatory, it's just a good practice with, and for cloud development and REST APIs, kind of a sanity check, am I still logged in? Again, not mandatory, that's the APIs, it's documented. You can do it whether you like it or not. It's not a mandatory part of the process. But the next step, which is critical, okay, let's create that export. And as a reminder, create the export doesn't actually start exporting the package. It only registered with the system with 3DEXPERIENCE. What is it that I want to export? So again, in this example, which is a simple example, I'm telling 3DEXPERIENCE, and this you can see the API in Postman here with a very simple payload, that I only want to export the native CAD app, the native CAD file. In my case, it's a simple SLDPRT, a CAD part in SolidWorks, because that's what I define, and the step XML, the step 242 XML in metadata. I'm not extracting derived outputs or other parameters, which are optional, okay? Once I submit this post command, as a result, as a return from the server, I will get a 201 response and also an export ID. Okay, so again, this doesn't actually start the export. It only registered what is it that I need to export, and I get an export ID. It's kind of like an export ticket back from the server. Okay, which is this export ID here, this identifier here that you can see on the top right. And this is the code to implement the same code, just what I showed in Postman. Postman would be more equivalent to what you would do as a low code in a formal iPaaS. If you use like VB or C# or Java or Python, you'll use code to do this. And then once you receive that export ID, you can then actually call the submit. The submit will actually start the job server to create the package to be later exported to the external system, the ERP or whatever it is, that external system, okay? So the submit is another API that takes that export ID from the previous API that will actually initiate the job server on the 3DEXPERIENCE platform to package whatever I told it to package, okay? And again, I'm showing this here in Postman with a little bit of code here, you know, with the relevant EIF API, okay? Once the package is computed and everything is done, again, there's another listening to part which I'm skipping here to listen. Once I get the communication, I'm listening to get the JMS, you know, to my broker, then I get the information that the package is computed successfully. I then need to get the data. Meaning I need to call another API to get all the results, information about where is the package, where are the files, so I can get everything and send it over to the external system. So I need to call this API, another API, without going into too much details, so that I can get all the relevant information and pass it along, stream it to the external system, okay, which is this step here, as I mentioned earlier in the swim diagram. And again, not going into detail and showing the code that does the same thing. Okay, and this is the results, kind of in a human readable version of the JSON. On the right side, it's a little bit small, but you can see there's various information, but really what's important here is I'm exporting a part and blah, blah, blah. The domain is engineering, it's a physical product, but I get the results is based on the definition of what I told it to export. I get two results because I requested to export the native file, which was the SolidWorks part, the step XML. So I have two files here, two results URL. One is for the native file, one is for the metadata step XML, and one for the report URL. And obviously who exported, when it was exported, and some other information. And then the code, how to get the information. Once I get this information, I can then stream it, download it, send it to the external system. And if I really dive into the data, so the first URL that I received was the actual native file, the SolidWorks file. The second was the metadata, the StepX, step 242 format metadata. And the third was just a report. If I expand the report, I see two JSON files. One is just about how many tokens. Marc talked about the tokens. Every time you export, you use some tokens. It's not just about licensing and various types that have been exported and whatnot. But what's important is this object-heavy one JSON. This file I find useful for myself for UAT, for testing. It's a Dassault format of the extraction of the data. So if you're using BOM, you have the instances of parent-child, things like that. For me, I find it a lot more human-friendly or human-readable format than the StepX. So I use it more for testing, validating that what I'm extracting is good data. So point I wanted to make is that you can use this for some of your testing. I find this to be a more readable format than the StepX sometime, just to make sure you have the right data in there. But anyways, that's the right format. So now I'm gonna show you I'm gonna minimize here for a second. I'm gonna minimize I'm gonna show you a quick demo, and Mark and you can talk to the demo
So,
if you'd like.
yep. So here's a demo. We're going to show you how we can, using EIF technology, integrate data from SolidWorks to 3D Experience. We're showing you first starting off in SolidWorks, where we're saving a part and linking it to a bookmark. This is just going through general 3D Experience, CAD integration, and general functionality. So we linked the part to a bookmark, we're hitting save, and this part will now be saved to the platform. And we see that it got saved to the platform. We're now in the platform. We see the part exists there. We're just going to show you some metadata about it. I'm going to show you that a derived output for it will get created or is created. And we see that it's initiating that derived output creation. We also, just for fun, are going to bring it into 3D Play so we can visualize that part as well. So basically, our integration, the whole EIF and everything that Ilan was saying, is running in the background and it's listening to events. And as you can see just now, it listened to an event that the part was created. It gets information about that event and it starts to do something. And what is it going to do? It's going to download the part, the derived output, the StepX file, and then upload that to SharePoint. And you're seeing that here. This code or information across the screen is all the download that's happening. But it did all that. This will obviously be seamless to any end user, but this is how we can visualize the program working from a command line. We're also going to show here that an export actually happened. We ran an export job, and you can see that on December 5th, when this video was recorded, that export job was created and some information on it. We jump quickly to SharePoint, and in SharePoint now, you will see that we have a copy of the file that was exported and the StepX file that we also exported or imported into SharePoint or linked to SharePoint as well. And then these files can be used, in various areas outside the enterprise as well. But that was just a quick review of how data from 3D Experience can be created and automatically integrated or published to Microsoft SharePoint. I think,
Yeah,
Ilan, you can, move
sure.
on.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so a little bit about the import. Like I said, the focus was primarily around the export. The import is a very similar process, just in the reverse order. So, I mean, step 1 and 2 here are not really relevant to the EIF. I mean, you get, those of you who are familiar with a little bit about the programming side in the platform. When you have to upload a file, you have to get an FCS ticket, and then you have to upload the file. This is, again, nothing to do with the framework specifically. Once you get that, you have to start the same process with the framework. So again, you have to create the import, same concept like create and export, and then submit, which is the same concept where it actually submits the job. When it's ready, you get the data. So very similar, even same similar endpoint, same concept, post, get, similar payloads, just the reverse way. Using step XML, just in the reverse way, sucking it into the platform, but same formats. And so we focus today more on the export. On the import, it's a lot more important to really understand the step X or the step XML format, because the metadata and the structures, and you really need to learn and understand that format. And the example here is in Java, by the way, but because it comes into play, it's a lot more important, especially if you want to bring in history and attributes. But otherwise, the general APIs are fairly straightforward and aligned with the export, just in the reversed order. It's all documented in the same place under the IP Exchange framework in the developer guide area that I showed you earlier. As far as skill set, that are required, so obviously RESTful Web Services API development goes along with that. Development skills, queuing, not rocket science. If you don't know anything about queuing, spend a day or two. Download, you can start from scratch. If it's ActiveMQ, read about it, download some packages to your whatever your IDE, and within a day or two you can be expert in queuing. It's not that complicated. Understand, read about iPaaS, integration platform as a service. Although if you develop your own, it's not really critical unless you use a third-party iPaaS. Obviously, understanding the 3D experience, the data model, the infrastructure, how to customize it, that's critical as well. So if you have all this, in a matter of a few weeks, you can get up to speed. If not, it may be a matter of months. But obviously, we're here to work with you, help you. We have that experience, of course, and we're here to work with you and help you build solutions around the framework. With that being said, I think we can open this to questions. I don't know, Marc, if you want to.
Yeah. Thank
You have
you.
a
So
question?
I see that people have um, typed in questions, so we can go through and answer those questions. In addition, you know, please feel free to reach out to us per the information on the screen if you want to follow up further, or sometimes it's easier to communicate over the phone or email or team meeting versus question and answer in this scenario. But in any case, let's ask the questions or answer questions. The first question is, what security, like if you're an ITAR ramifications, are there around the authentication method? And with the EIF authentication for on cloud, it uses basic authentication. So that's a standard web protocol to authenticate, and you would have to evaluate, with the end customer if that is secure or not. But in the latest releases of 3D Experience Cloud, it will also support OAuth 2.0 authentication, which I believe is a little bit more secure authentication method. Though if you are a ITAR customer, you're probably not using the web, you're using on-premise, and in that case, you'd have the batch service authentication with a security token and security ticket that we talked about at the beginning. So hopefully that answers the authentication question. The next question is, can you create bidirectional passing of information between JD Edwards and Oracle Fusion from 3D Experience or to 3D Experience Innovia? So the simple answer is yes. That's basically what the EIF technology supports, is passing information to and from other systems, such as JD Edwards or Oracle Fusion. The devil is always in the details, how you want to pass that information. If there's third-party iPaaS solutions out there that can let you do it in a semi plug-and-play point of view, or you want to write your own, custom integration or configure your own system to handle that integration. But the simple answer is yes. The more complex answer is it really depends on how you want to integrate that data and what technology you want to use to do it. Another question was, for importing physical products, is it possible to just import metadata? And the answer is yes. The import mechanism can obviously import CAD data, but you can also set it up or configure it to just import metadata, bills of materials, item master or physical product metadata without any CAD data behind it.
The same goal, by the way, for the export.
Same goes with export. You can just export metadata and no CAD as well. We have a question here. Will you be sharing the slide deck? So we will be sharing the video of this recording. Yeah, for those of you that were on it before, there was a little bit of a technical issue, but yes, we will be sharing the video recording. And if you want an actual copy of the slide deck, please reach out to us and we can give that to you as well. One more question here. Who will manage or implement iPaaS or 3D Experience ERP client? So iPaaS stands for Platform as a Service. And really, these iPaaS or middleware technologies are managed by the iPaaS provider like Boomi, and they host it and run it as an iPaaS provider. But that's not always the best solution. Sometimes they can be more expensive and even take more time to configure. So you may want kind of your own solution. But who will manage it? It really depends. It could be the end client managing it. It could be the service provider, or it could be maybe these third-party iPaaS providers. So it really depends on the situation as well. But with that being said, I don't see any more questions coming in. So once again, thank you very much for this webinar. We appreciate any feedback you have. Please get to us, come back to us if you have any more detailed questions. And we'd love your feedback or suggestions on other webinars. So, please feel free to get back to us, as I said. But with that, I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'm going to end the webinar, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Signing off here.